Hey guys, Omni here. Last night I went to the theater and I saw The Matrix Resurrections, and I'm going to give you my spoiler-free review and thoughts on the film. If you're new here or if you just don't know, I'm a huge fan of this franchise. Next to Star Wars, as far as trilogies go, this is the next one on the list for me as far as franchises. This came out the right time for me. I was really part of that Matrix craze when it came out, had all the VHSs, the DVDs, and I think a lot of people in my age range could say the same thing about the Matrix trilogy, and that it's one of the first films, if not the first film, that really started to make you think about films in more than just the content that is on the screen. The thoughts, the ideas, the philosophies, the metaphors. What does this mean? Thinking about the film outside, literally outside of your TV box. And it was one of those things that I just got really obsessed with and, for lack of a better term, really went down the rabbit hole in with this series. You know, from the trilogy itself, the Animatrix, the games, I was really swept up in it all. So when I saw the trailer for this, I got really excited. This is something they've been talking about and juggling around on how to make this happen ever since The Matrix Revolutions came out and was released into the wild. How can we continue this? Do we want to continue this? And that conversation is honestly a 40-something minute chunk of this movie. It's very meta and self-referential, and almost to a fault, I think, because honestly, when I came out of this film, despite how excited I was very confused about how to feel about it. There were some things that were introduced in here, some things that were tweaked, some things that, some concepts and ideas that I wasn't sure if it just went over my head or anything like that, because that's kind of something The Matrix is known for. It takes multiple viewings to kind of absorb all of this stuff. So I wanted to not give you guys my first initial impressions because I'll be honest, I was mostly confused. A mix of unmoved and confusion was pretty much how I left the theater because it was out of all the entries in this trilogy, this series, the franchise, and as a whole, it's the entry that feels the least like a Matrix movie. It's almost a bit of a satire, mix of a comedy, some of that Matrix action, and just something else. And it was really kind of I was really having a hard time trying to like reconcile with what I just watched. So I literally just rewatched the film before recording this. Even last night when I was at the theater, I was sat in the back, so I wasn't like bothering anybody. It wasn't a packed theater, which honestly wasn't too big of a surprise. And I just took notes. And on top of that, including last night's notes and my notes that I took from rewatching it, because there were some things I wanted to revisit and definitely hone in on the second watch to see if there was some explanations. And a lot of the times there wasn't. I've got like 4 pages of notes on this movie. I'll kind of start off with what we know about the story. So this has been in the trailers. It's been talked about by the actors. So I don't consider this a spoiler. If you do, you might not want to hear this if you want to go in as clean as possible. But from what we know, when we revisit Thomas Anderson, in this iteration, he is a developer. He is the creator, the game designer for a series of games called the Matrix Trilogy. And pressure from on high is coming down from the higher ups for him to create a sequel to those games, something he swore he would never do. You know, let them be, move on from that. He's in the middle of designing a brand new IP, but literally in the movie, Warner Brothers is his boss, is who he's working for, is demanding a sequel to that trilogy. And it's this, we'll do it with or without you. So it, like I said, it's very meta, especially in the opening bits. The first half of this movie is very much about how do we revisit the Matrix? How do we make a sequel to the Matrix? And what was it that people even liked about the Matrix? You know, it critiques itself. It pokes fun at itself. And I wouldn't say it's mean-spirited, but it definitely seems like some of Lana Wachowski's frustrations, maybe at the studios or the whole idea of the fact that they created the Matrix and to begin with, and what pressure came from that, from the fandom, from the studios themselves to recreate that feeling, that vibe. A lot of that leaks into the dialogue and the script, and they critique the idea of these nostalgia bait, rehashed sequels and reboots and all of that, while at the same time it does all of these things that it's critiquing about. So that's where I got kind of confused about how to feel about this. Is this supposed to be ironic or unironic that this is happening throughout the film? So that's one of those things where I get a little mixed up in it, and it takes me out of the film a little bit. But honestly, that opening section is my favorite bits of the movie. Before we actually wake up from the Matrix, before we get past that veil that is kind of that we've seen, that Thomas Anderson, this life that he's living in, that whole stuff honestly is the most interesting parts of the movie for me. I found it working quite well. The Neil Patrick Harris as his therapist is really interesting. The way that character evolves later, it kind of loses me a little bit as far as the train of logic that goes into his purpose and goals. It definitely loses me, and I've tried to reconcile it multiple times on both these watches, and it just doesn't make sense to me. As far as the performances in the movie go, I gotta commend like Carrie-Anne Moss and Keanu Reeves, because they slide right back into these roles, and especially Keanu Reeves, because like honestly, he's become quite known, especially since The Matrix, for this very monotone, wooden kind of acting, which has made him very, comfortable and fitting for a role like John Wick, a character like that is quiet, that is reserved, that is self-serious. But in this, it feels very nuanced. It feels very lived in. Like he goes through various different feelings, and his performance very much echoes this tragic series of events that this character has experienced, as well as his self-doubt with what is actually real. And it actually really works in his performance. We do have some newcomers to the franchise in here that I would like to talk about a little bit. Jessica Henwick, I think, shines quite well in this. She's great in this. It's nice seeing her in something since Iron Fist. I'm sure she's probably been in some other stuff, but this is the first thing I think I've seen her in since Iron Fist, and she does a really good job of this. As far as the new characters go, as far as the crew that we see that are jacking into the world to help with this puzzle, the rest of the crew that she's got, honestly, they're not that memorable. There's one character in particular that I did really like, but they don't get a lot of screen time. But she's got a very endearing little couple of moments at one point in the film, and I really did like that. Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, and again, this is something that's been talked about openly from the actors, and it's mentioned in, I think, the second trailer that he's playing Morpheus. I won't go into any of the whys that is happening, but his performance is very different. He has a very different take on this character, and given the in-world explanation for it, it doesn't really match how I would imagine this character acting. And once you've seen the film, you might feel the same way. I'd be very curious if you guys feel the same way once you've seen the film. And then finally, the last one I want to kind of touch upon is Jonathan Groff is in here as Neo's boss at this gaming company. And once you kind of learn the secret behind this character, his performance, again, kind of similarly to Yahya's, doesn't match what we learn about the character for me. And again, like before, I'd love to know your take on this whole situation. There's a lot of great concepts and ideas in the movie. I just don't know that it juggles them all very well. But I didn't hate the movie. I did come out of it mostly, on the second watch especially, the second time I watched the movie, a lot of the things that didn't work for me the first time through worked in the second viewing. So I feel like that might be the case with a lot of people going into this, because like expectations are going to play a huge part about that initial viewing. So checking that going in is going to be the biggest obstacle for, I think, a lot of people. And you can see that in a lot of the reviews. A lot of people are very mixed on how to feel about this. And, it's easily my least favorite in the entire trilogy. Well, now quadrilogy. And honestly, as far as cinematography goes, it's the weakest. I think it has some really bad sequences. I don't think it's shot very well. It's definitely not as inspired or stylized as the original films. The action is not as good. It kind of harkens back the way that the action is kind of cut and edited for a film that was very much so about the action, the combat, and all of that, and revolutionizing how to actually display that and show that on screen. It feels more like something like Black Widow from the way that the fights are edited. And I don't know if that is because of the crew that they had on staff, or if this is the limitations, obviously, of these aging actors that they're bringing back. But it felt very limited and cutted and choppy in a lot of the action sequences. And once a certain point hits, there's a lot of repetitive action. And then there's like something that happens at the end where it just turns into almost a completely different genre of film. But there are some ideas that it does play around with that I really like, because it examines the cultural legacy of the Matrix, both within the world and without. Because obviously the commentary and the legacy of the Matrix come up when they're trying to do the whole sequel thing, but it comes into later with the remnants of Zion, the people that are still fighting, the people that are still lingering. Like, did what Trinity and Neo do matter in the grand scale of things if we're back in the Matrix? And you see the impact that they had on the world, the inspiration that they had. Like, it works in a meta contextual way. That's one of the ways that I feel like the meta commentary actually works is in this, because this is one of those things, because of the pop culture that this has just kind of become a part of. This is a franchise, this is a group, these are names that are going to transcend generations. And this film plays with those. You have people that were there, that knew them firsthand. Then you have people that grew up hearing the stories, that grew up idolizing these people. It's really interesting, some of the things that they play with. It's just kind of a mess in the end. And like I said, I don't know if they were just like, I will throw as much money at you as possible. Please make us a sequel. Because obviously, we only have one Wachowski making this movie. Only one came back. And it was both that created the original trilogy and advised on the games and advised on the Animatrix. They were the ones controlling and pushing this narrative forward. And it just makes me wonder, like, is this a genuine return, or do you let some of your cynicism leak into the script? And I don't know. Was this your best foot forward? I don't know. Because, like I said, it dances with some interesting ideas. There's some really interesting sequences. There is some really beautiful imagery in here. I just think it gets a little too meta for its own good, because anytime something self-referential comes to play, it takes me out of it a little bit, because it just seems too self-aware. Especially when it's criticizing things that this movie itself does later in the film. And on top of that, it doesn't even trust the viewer to really be in the know for what's going on. There are a lot of cutaways, because of the way the movie kind of sets up the continuation and the world that they're in. There's a lot of just straight up, remember this thing from the previous trilogy. And there's a lot of cutaways, just to straight footage from the original trilogy, to make sure it hammers it in. A lot of ways that can work a lot of times for people flashing back, but it happens a lot throughout the movie, almost to the point where it's just like, it doesn't trust the audience to have been there. Now, for a whole new audience, is this movie going to work? I don't think so, because it really relies on the original trilogy. It is, as much as it feigns being a reboot, it is integral and tied into intimately the original trilogy. So like, it's hard to separate itself. So I don't know how somebody going into this not knowing anything, or not having seen any of the previous films, what they're going to think of it. The whole point of the film also has this narrative about love, the dynamic, the push and pull, the draw between Trinity and Neo. And I find that part of the movie also quite fascinating. I like what they did with it. And what happened, and I'll just say that I called what happened. However, the logistics of which I still don't understand, because it doesn't really flesh any of it out. This movie answers a lot of questions by not answering them. Once the third act gets rolling and we start heading into the conclusion and some of the puzzle pieces start to come together, there's still just an incomplete picture at the end. Like, if you were to be putting this jigsaw puzzle together as you're going through the movie, there are still massive gaps in it. And you could make the argument that the trilogy's always been like that, but you can find the answers when you're thinking about everything that's been set up. In this, there's like a bunch of non-answers. There's a lot of hand waving. And there's a lot of logic within this version of this iteration, this film, that just doesn't add up. So I don't know if they plan on making more of these. I don't know if this was a one and done. They definitely leave it open to go further, though the way it ends as well, I don't know what the next step would be. So I don't know. I don't know. Like I said, I'm very mixed on the film. I don't dislike the film. I just don't love it. While I have some issues with, Reloaded, Revolution, I still love those movies and the lore and the way they built upon each other and the way they even concluded. But this one definitely out of the franchise is my least favorite. Like I said before, it's got a lot of great ideas. It just doesn't execute them that well. And I don't love it. I don't love it. Some people had compared this to like The Last Jedi of the Matrix films. I was like, I don't think it's definitely not that. I do think that there will be, as there is with a lot of films these days, a vocal contention that will probably just be really loud and really dumb, which I don't agree with. I think a more apt comparison would be, and I think it was actually Brad Jones, because I was watching his review on this yesterday after I got out of the film, as well as Jeremy Johns also echoed something very similar, that this is not so much like The Last Jedi. It is more like what Wes Craven did with his New Nightmare. However, that movie, I think, is executed that in a much better way than this. So, I don't know. I'm very curious to see where it goes. I think it's very funny that Warner Brothers let this be made with in a way that put them in like such a negative light, which is also kind of interesting because it's not the first time we've seen that. They let Teen Titans Go to the movies, made fun of them quite a bit. Like, this is like, sometimes I just don't know what, are they just like, do they not pay attention to what they're greenlighting sometimes? Well, the DCEU would probably beg to agree with that. I don't know. But guys, have you seen the film? What did you think? If you have not watched a single Matrix movie and you watch this, I definitely want to know how you felt about it. Please sound off the comments. Let me know your thoughts down below. We'll carry on the conversation after the video. Feel free to join our Discord. We can talk about it there as well. So far, I don't think anybody in my Discord's seen it because that channel is kind of dead at the moment, and I really want to talk to people about what I watched. So come in. But guys, that's it for this. But before we go, I want to shout out our channel legends: Mandy Sher, Ryan Karen, Jason Coleman, Philly Vane, Yori Corey-Scott, Margaret Grace, Mary Bradley, Jeffrey Hale, and various abominations. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, everybody.